Are we stretching?
He's not good.
Oh, okay.
All right. So I call this meeting back to order at 6:02 p.m. We're returning from closed session where we did not take any action. If you could please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being live streamed, and so your likeness may show up on the internet. And we'll move on to item 3C, adoption of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
So I have a motion by Christina, a second by Stacy. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. That takes us to 4A, public comments. The board welcomes comments from the public. If you'd like to address the board, please fill out a blue card located near the entrance of the room and turn it in. You'll be called on to comment when your item is reached on the agenda. If your item is not on the agenda, you will comment at this time. Provisions of the Brown Act preclude any action being taken on any item not appearing on the posted agenda for action. Oral presentations and communications to the board are limited to 3 minutes per person and 20 minutes per topic. We do not have any blue cards tonight, so we'll move on to item 5A, public hearing. And I guess that's you. So I'm going to open the public hearing. Take it away.
Sounds good. Pleasure to be with you again. Once again, I'm Doug Johnson from National Demographics. And it's always good to be back in Campbell. So this is the second hearing, so I'll kind of go through these things a little briefer this time. But again, we have the California Voting Rights Act. Let's see. This was in the last one, right? We have two versions of this, so I want to make sure I have the right one. But so the California Voting Rights Act builds on the Federal Voting Rights Act. It takes the 4 tests that you have to fail in order to be in violation of federal law, and it makes it easier for plaintiffs by eliminating 2 of them. So you no longer have to show any kind of discrimination, prejudice, or anything like that to be in violation of law. It's simply a statistical test. And if you fail the statistical test, or if it's even in the gray area, it's going to cost you a lot of money, and you'll have to switch your election system. And the few battles that have taken place have all been multi-million-dollar battles. And so what we're seeing is what we call a quiet tsunami sweeping the state. At least 175 school districts have switched, and that number's a few months old, so it's well above that now. 105 plus cities have switched. 1 county board of supervisors, there's only 1 because the other 57 were already by district. So that was the last one. And now we're seeing more and more activity in water districts and airport districts and fire protection districts. So this really is hitting every part of California, local government. And it's all because of the money risk. You can see the settlements there. Palmdale, $4.7 million. Santa Clara, $3.16 million. And these are just the amounts they paid to the plaintiff side. It doesn't include their own defense funds. So to go through the process and get into what is a safe harbor legally, where you can't be sued, we have to follow a certain process laid out by the state. And this is the second of 2 initial hearings. It's a little unusual in that the state requires these 2 informational hearings to be held before there's any draft maps. So at the next meeting is when we'll start talking about maps. But the goal of this is really to inform the public, get the word out this happening, and also to get any input on communities of interest that residents may have. Then we'll come back for at least 2 meetings. The plan is for 2 hearings on the draft maps. And then the board will adopt a map. And this is unusual in that the board's action is not the last step. We actually then go to the County Committee on School District Organization, who then also signs off on the map prior to going into place for the 2020 elections. And we have this odd sense of timing that this district and everyone going through this process at this point is going through, where the map will be used for the trustee year elections in 2020, but of course only the seats that are up in 2020 will be up. Then the map will be adjusted in 2021 to reflect the new census data. In about March of 2021, we'll get new census data and we'll have to realign the seats or the map. The catch is at that point it's more just hopefully just a more adjusting the lines to reflect the new data. It's not drawing from scratch and not nearly as big a project as it is now. But those adjustments will be made prior to the remaining trustee years holding their first election in 2022. But that map will then be in place for the entire decade. It won't be updated until after the 2030 census. When we're drawing lines, we're looking at really two sets of criteria. The first on the left are the federal laws. These are the requirements. So we have to have an equal number of people, and it is people as counted by the 2010 census. It's not registered voters or citizens or anything like that. It's human beings counted by the census, and an equal number in each trustee area. Then we have to make sure that we follow the Federal Voting Rights Act, which makes sure that the adopted map doesn't abridge anyone's ability to vote based on race or language. But at the same time, you can go too far on that. So no racial gerrymandering. That means that race cannot be the predominant reason a map is drawn or chosen. It can be one of the factors, but it can't be the main factor. So those are the requirements, and NDC and your legal counsel will work together and make sure that the maps that come before you all comply with those. Where the discretion and the decisions come down is the criteria on the right. These are more goals, they're not requirements. So to follow the traditional redistricting principles, this is things like communities of interest, looking at your neighborhoods, trying to be compact, contiguous, and follow major, easily recognizable boundaries. Those three are really so that it's easy for voters to know where their borders are. If they want to go knock on doors for a candidate they like, we want it to be easy to figure out which doors to knock on. Then we want to respect the voters' choices to the degree possible. This means let the voters decide which current board members have earned re-election, and to do that, the board members need to be in separate seats. And again, this is a goal, not a requirement, but we do try to have each board member in a separate seat so that everyone can run and the voters can decide whether the current board members are re-elected or not, instead of my lines dictating to the voters, you may want to re-elect these two, but you can't. So that's that. And then we mentioned planned future growth, because this map, as I mentioned, will only be used in 2020. When you realign the seats in 2021, that's when really we'd think more about planned future growth and take that into consideration for that map that's going to be in place for the decade. So we have a lot of data. I'm not going to go through all this data, but all this data is provided for every trustee area and every map. So you get total population numbers up in the top left, and your 220,000 roughly 2010 estimate divided by 5 gives you the 44,000 people per trustee area number. Below that, you see citizen voting age population with percentage Hispanic, white, Black or African American, and Asian Pacific Islander. Those are the numbers we focus on for the Federal Voting Rights Act compliance to see if a trustee area is effective or majority for one of those groups. Then all the other data, turnout levels, immigration status, language spoken at home, income data, those are all data that are available if folks want to look at those factors when trying to identify their communities of interest. And often we get issues, especially more at the city council level than school level, but where a group wants there to be a district that's heavily renters or something like that. And so all that data is available for anyone that wants to look at it for every trustee area and every map. In terms of the Voting Rights Act, there's certainly not a concentration that's large enough where we're going to have a majority Latino seat or a majority Asian American seat. We do have some concentration. You can see the greens and the green city blocks on the left-hand map and on the right-hand map are where the Asian Americans on the left are 50 to 65% of the area. Blues and purples are less than that. So really up in the in the northwest for Asian Americans, we get somewhat of a more concentration of Asian Americans. For Latinos, really the Latino eligible voters, the only concentration we get is up in the Burbank area, up in kind of the corner where the freeways meet, northeast of where the freeways meet. So since we don't really have the Federal Voting Rights Act dictating where the lines go, then we really come down to looking at communities of interest, your neighborhoods. And for school districts, that's usually your attendance zones. That's the predominant one. For you, it may also be the feeder districts that people identify with and think about when they're thinking about their communities of interest. But it could be anything. An area around a park, an area between major roads, however people define their neighborhood. But the second question that's often forgotten is the question of, okay, this is your community of interest. Say this is your attendance zone. Do you want to be kept together? And that maximizes your voting strength and gives you the best shot at electing your preferred candidate to that seat. But that's only one seat. And keep in mind, it's still going to take 3 votes to do anything on the board. So often, communities of interest, in particular attendance zones, are kind of respected by dividing them, giving them multiple representatives on the board. Just quick sample maps. This is kind of the traditional approach. Really regional seats, whether it's the Compton City Council on the left or Glendale Unified School Board on the right. Very regional, keeping each community together. In Compton, you can kind of see the green bump that comes from the equal population requirement that dominates everything. But they tried to do 4 quadrants. Glendale, similarly, 5 very regional driven seats. That's keeping each community together. Kind of a traditional approach. Then we have Pasadena in the top left. They wanted every council district to touch what's Old Town Pasadena. Big redevelopment, very successful, kind of commercial heart of the city. And they wanted to be sure every council member was responsible and accountable to that and felt responsible to it. So you can see some odd lines as they each kind of stretch to meet that Colorado Boulevard there in the middle where Old Town is. Central Unified, similarly on the top right, that's outside Fresno. You can see the dense streets of Fresno in the top right corner of the map, and then it's rural as they go out, and you can see the funny shaped trustee areas as they go around and they all pick up trustee areas there. Yeah.
I'm afraid I'll forget. The purple area on the Pasadena map, is that strange square in the middle of the yellow? Wouldn't that be considered a bit of gerrymandering for sure? I mean, it's very odd, unless it's topographical and that's a hill and the rest is valley area?
Yeah, no, it's city blocks, but they're 2 distinct neighborhoods. So Pasadena has very distinct neighborhoods. So yes, it is an odd shape, but they are kind of putting together individual neighborhoods, not in the most square manner possible, but actually, I may have them backwards, but one of them ends up being heavily African American and the other one ends up being heavily Latino. And they're keeping, as I mentioned before, then we're not picking city block by city block, so racism predominant, but they identified neighborhoods, kept each neighborhood together, and then put those together into districts that way.
Yeah, it could be that there's creeks or some natural boundaries there too, I don't know.
Yeah, well, and this is a great
odd.
example. Actually, the funny part here is this long neck extending to the north.
Uh-huh.
And this is a great example of funky issues that come in. Turns out the neighborhood up here at the very top, there's a liquor store that's kind of out of control. It's the source of like half the crime in the region. They've been trying to shut it down for 15 years, but it takes a long time. Well, the council member and his staff were now experts in this issue, working with the neighborhood through the process. So they really wanted to keep that liquor store in that district. And so it's a very policy-driven reason because they didn't want to spend 2 years teaching a new council member all about these, how do you pull a liquor license kind of things. So those kinds of issues do drive it. And the key thing is these are all policy-driven, funny-looking lines. And there's no right or wrong between the first approach and the second approach. It's simply what do you think works best for your jurisdiction. And we'll say most school districts do go fairly strongly for multiple representatives for each attendance zone and making sure that each board member has multiple schools in their trustee area, just to avoid the possibility that a board member could just sit back and only care about their school and not really pay attention to the rest of the district. I put this in here. Obviously, as I mentioned, attendance zones are generally the driving or the first community of interest concern. So this is your map. And as we know before, you have a little bit of an odd situation with the 2 orange areas that are kind of freeze, where people can choose between the 2 high schools. But for the most part, we do have set regions. And so the typical approach we take is show you a map that tries to keep each one together as much as possible, and then a couple that divide them up in different ways so you can see how the different options work. But one of the things tonight is you can actually give us direction. If you have a preference right now, you can give us direction on those criteria and let us know how you want those maps to go. So that's a quick spin through the material. The hearing tonight is both to get this information out and to get any feedback you have and that the public may have on what are those communities and neighborhoods that we should use as building blocks for the trustee areas. And then you have the criteria, I believe, on your agenda for formal adoption as well. So happy to answer any questions now or after any comments that we might get.
So, so our district spreads out over 6 municipalities. We're in 4 council districts in San Jose. Not necessarily where our schools are located, but we have students who attend our schools from 4 different San Jose City Council districts. We have a little slice of Montecito, we have a little slice of Los Gatos, we have a little slice of Saratoga, we have a little slice of Santa Clara, and we have a big slice of Campbell. So my first question is, does it make sense for us to be as aligned to the new Campbell council, or does it make sense for us to be aligned, or are the council districts of the municipalities that we cover, could they be considered, part of this interest thing that we want to make sure that it's balanced out? Because I know in the past, the folks that are in Santa Clara have really felt like they're just not really served in this district. And the folks in Montecito, they want to be part of Saratoga, right, and all this other stuff. So any thoughts around what do we do about that?
Sure. So the numbers never work out where you can just adopt those maps and use them straight up, but they can be, we can't have trustee years that try to line up with cities and that kind of thing. It's certainly something we can look at if you want us to. It does tend to be handy because keep in mind, the only official purpose of these trustee areas is on election day. All other days, hopefully, you just focus on running the district as a whole district. So as people get organized with their neighbors, the odds are they'll probably gravitate to the same neighbors that have issues at the school district as they gravitate to the same neighbors where they have issues with the city. And so it's nice to keep them together so they can continue to work in their local clubs or informal groups as they get involved in different areas. It tends to work the other way, we usually see. Most people, when they first get involved in politics in an area, tend to get involved in the school district first because they have kids in the school and they have a very personal desire on it. But it can work the other way as well. So yes, we're happy to look at that if that is something that you're interested in us looking at and taking into account as much as possible, given that we won't be able to follow them perfectly just because that equal population requirement is so strict.
Okay. And then I want to go back to the whole setting or the continuity of office question, because I'm even more confused. And I don't know if we need to wait for Harold or not, but we have 2 board members that are up for re-election in 2020, and they will be running for the trustee area seats. And there are 3 board members that were elected at large, but potentially the trustee areas are going to be built around maybe where we're sitting, so that when we run in 2022, there'll be 1 trustee in the new trustee areas. So if I'm on the 2022 slate, I was elected at large, and the maps come out, and I'm in trustee area C, and I move to trustee area D in 2021. Do I lose my seat because I'm not in the trustee area that we originated? And then if I run for re-election and I'm still at that address in trustee area D, I'm running against the incumbent for trustee area D. Is that how it works?
Well, let me take a shot at it, and Harold will wave me off if I go erroneous on this. So because you're at large right now, you can move anywhere you want. The question only comes up when it's time for you to run for re-election. And at that time, you need to be in one of the trustee areas that's up in 2022. If you're in the same one as another board member's up in 2022, well, then you'll have to run against each other.
Got it.
Once you're elected by trustee area, then you have to stay in that trustee area or leave the board. But until you first run by trustee area, you can move around it however you want. The trick is if in 2021 you move into a trustee area that elected in 2020,
Then I can't run.
then at the end of your term, you still get to finish your term, but at the end of your term, you just leave the board.
Okay, got it.
And then rerun it too. If you
Well, if the seat's not up in 2022, you have to wait till 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there-
A couple quick questions on the one that was talking about the demographic study. I saw that we're looking at turnout rates for 16 and 14. Is there a chance 18 will be available in time for us, or will that not be taken into account?
It's just come out. The state takes a long time to process that data, so it's just come out. We don't have it in our big database, but we can take a look and see if the percentages vary much from 2014. So we'll have a sense of that.
And then the household income, is that done from census or is that done from some other database?
Everything on the right-hand side is done from census data, but it's the American Community Survey. So it's from their annually updated data. So it's not 2010, but it's ballpark 2014, 15-ish data.
Thank you. And then the last one was Trustee Brown was talking about, can we align with council districts? And just the fact that she said we touched 6 municipalities and then that includes all of Campbell. I don't know which one you could align with to make it even be close. As you were talking about it, I'm like, where would that line be? Oh, wait a minute. So I don't know if you could. But it was but just looking at it, I'm like,
I don't know if you could either. I just know
Yeah.
that the people that are kind of in the fringes of Los Gatos and Montecito and Santa Clara, they just I don't think they feel as connected to our schools because they're this small little percentage that's not in Santa Clara Unified or Saratoga and things like that. And I was just wondering if there's anything that we can do in the maps to throw them all together. I
make them
don't
feel
know.
good. Right. Thank you.
So just a process question. I know we have this resolution. The resolution is when we decide the actual criteria. Right now it's just for questions. Okay. So is there any more questions about the actual presentation before we move on to the resolution?
Are there any questions from members of the public?
Since it's a public
There's none.
hearing.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, would any member of the public like to address us during this public hearing? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing, and we'll move on to item 5A, adopt resolution number establishing criteria for developing trustee area boundaries. Harold, are you presenting on this, or do we just dive in? Can you give us like the 2-minute gist of maybe how we can start to narrow some of this down?
So I'm happy to do that, and this is definitely going to be the two-headed monster with Doug because we've been through these before. Really what you're doing now is the next charge that will come out of this is for your demographer to actually prepare the map. And that takes into account any public input that you've received, any correspondence that you've received, and most importantly, the board laying out what criteria it wants to be considered. And I think Doug's used as an example. I know I did the last time I was here with you, an example as well. Do you want your high school attendance boundary areas to have more than one trustee in them, or do you want to try to use those as, if you will, dividing points? That's one area that you can look at. So what we've done is we have this, the criteria resolution before you. This is not required by law. This is something that we recommend so that your demographer has the guidance of the board, and so the public knows, and you can put on your website, these are the criteria the board has laid out. They're not exclusive criteria. So all of them are really conditioned, except for those that are legally required. Most of them are conditioned on, is this feasible? You know, can it feasibly be done? Can this be done in a non-discriminatory way? And you'll see at the Exhibit A, after doing this for a number of years, we finally decided the best thing to do is to give you a multiple choice test. And it basically lays out the criteria that we most typically see applied, but leaves that space for you at the end, as many spaces as you want for additional criteria. Certainly, Doug and I are both here tonight. If the board begins expressing interest in a criteria that we feel may run afoul of either federal or state law, that's why we're here, is to let you know that. On Exhibit A, just to point this out, the first 3 boxes that are checked, those are because those are required by federal law. You really have no choice on those. And we're happy to talk you through any or all of those criteria as we go tonight. But this is your chance to tell your demographer, these are the things you want to keep in mind. And the last point I'll just make, I'm thinking of one particular district that I worked in, again, Doug was also involved with, where they initially decided that one of the criteria that was very important to them was to consider where school boundaries were and to kind of disregard where city boundaries were. Then as the process went on, the board decided, no, we also want to take into account where city boundaries are. And so it's not too late for you to continue having input. This is really just for the development of the first map.
So,
One way we could do this is, I assume everyone's read through this, but we could take 2 to 3 minutes. We treat it like a consent calendar. If you want to pull one of these to discuss it, we can pull it. If not, we'll assume everyone wants that one. Then we'll go through the ones people pulled, and then we'll add things.
Can I
Is it-
ask a
yeah.
clarifying question of Harold first? Are these a pretty standard set of criteria, or
Well, they certainly are standard for the districts we've worked with. You're looking at the same resolution that the last probably half dozen school districts we've gone through we used. And we developed this based in part on input from Doug and his colleagues, and in large part from what we've actually experienced in other districts. So these don't come out of thin air. These are very common. The vast majority of districts that I've worked with have adopted almost all or all of the criteria.
okay? All right.
You want to do that? Just as a way to facilitate discussion so it doesn't,
Yeah.
technical issue, just hold on.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Good. All right, so let's take a couple minutes. Let's just go through. Or questions, Kiki.
Okay, question. So are we considering now whether or not we want it to be a consideration or not? Versus
Got it.
prioritizing.
I say pull it if you don't want it to be a consideration. Or you want to discuss it further.
I don't know.
So like, oh, I really hate number 15. I'm going to pull it.
Or I think I would much prefer us to do 1 through 6 and 15 only if it, Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not opposed to your process.
Seeking clarity.
I'm just thinking out loud. So let's all just look at it and come back
Okay.
together.
Okay.
Just give me a thumbs up when you're done.
Anticipating.
All right, so let's just run through. We'll see where we're at. Does anyone want to pull number 4? How about number 5? How about number 6? All right, so. How about number 7? How about number 8? I'm going to pull 8. How about number 9? How about number 10? Great. So we will discuss 6, 7, 8, and then we can talk about more criteria after that. if that's okay with the board. All right, so number 6 is the boundaries of trustee areas shall observe communities of interest such as the district's underlying high school attendance areas, rural or urban populations, municipalities, social interest, agricultural, industrial, or service industry interest, and the like insofar as practicable.
So I don't know of any rural areas within our school district boundaries, so I'm not sure that we have to necessarily call that out unless it's a legal thing. And then the other thing, in terms of communities of interest that has kind of popped in my head, is that we're starting to see a big push, at least in San Jose. I live in San Jose, so I know a little bit more about San Jose than Campbell, for building neighborhood associations. And they have distinct boundaries too. So I'm wondering if we want to look at having a neighborhood association be a community of interest, because maybe we wouldn't want to split like Cambrian Park into 4 different things, or Robertsville or whatever.
Is anyone opposed to adding neighborhood associations?
I'm not opposed to looking at them.
Yeah.
It might be impossible to contain, but I'm not opposed to that being something that's looked at. I know some are more active than others. It depends on if there's something going on.
Yeah.
Then they tend to peter out a bit.
And what
Great.
about taking out rural?
The
Is
word
that
rural?
Yeah, is that an issue, Harold, from a legal perspective?
All of these are really up to you. So this is one of those great moments where I can tell you it's at your pleasure. What makes sense to include, what doesn't, don't. And I also just want to note again, it says at the very end of number 6, insofar as practicable. So for example, if the demographer, there may be areas where the homeowners associations are very well defined and that's public information. There may be other ones where they're defunct, where it's not easily found. So that all would get factored in.
And you're thinking the word rural needs to come out because there is no rural, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so process question again. Right now, are we going through and saying, for example, what are communities of interest, which visible features we want to be considered, or are we saying that we do want physical features to be considered, period, or not? Or is it both?
From my perspective, it's both.
Okay.
And Doug can speak for himself on that. But basically, the more input you can give to your demographer, the more he'll know what to look for. And so, for example, I worked with a community years ago where there's a canal that divides the community, and there's only certain points you could cross the canal. They very much wanted that to be considered because people on either side of the canal didn't see themselves as part of the same community. And so that was a topographical area that they really wanted to be considered. You will know better than, I mean, I grew up in the area, but I'm kind of out of date. And you'll know better than Doug, you'll know better than us, what are really the key points. There was one that we dealt with recently where there was a defined neighborhood we didn't know existed. Doug didn't know it existed, and we showed up at one of the board meetings, and the community member said, "Why are you dividing the X neighborhood?" Then we knew it was a neighborhood. So to the extent you know of strong community boundaries of like the Cambrian Park area, whatever the area is that's pretty well defined in the area, it's a great help to the extent you can tell us tonight. It doesn't even have to be part of the criteria, just to elicit as much of that from you for the demographer as possible.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I think that neighborhood associations are more developed in like District 1, for example. I think they're they've just been at this a little bit longer. District 9 is just coming on board. I don't know about District 6. Those are all San Jose, and I'm not familiar with Campbell too much. And then the other thought that I had also is just on the feeder districts, is that we might want to do something along the feeder districts too, because you know we got 2 former feeder district trustees up here, so I don't know if we might want to split it up a little bit, or.
My point around that was, as he was talking, was there really isn't any, this side of 17 against this side of 17. Really, the communities of interest are probably our high schools, But really, I think all of us represent those high schools. That was the only one I could come up with, was the feeder districts and the high school district. Could anybody else come up with another? The neighborhood associations, I guess, was the third, but I didn't
Yeah, I
find
think-
any in my head. Did you?
For me,
Anybody?
I can come up with 35, right? But I think there's like one or two relevant ones, right? To me, the most relevant by far is the high school district boundaries, right? Where kids go. Because the biggest fear in going to this type of system is the feudalistic nature of, 30 years from now when someone gets elected is like, I don't care about school A, B, C, or D because I'm only elected from school E, right? And I think the more we think about that today, the better. Neighborhood associations come and go, like city boundaries, they're relevant, but like in my personal view, the thing that is the most relevant for us is where are 5 high schools? Where do people go from them? Everything else is like way down the list for me.
But do you think we should make sure that we split them up so it can't be, I just care about E? Is that what you're saying?
Personally, I think every trustee area should have two
Or more.
schools, probably looking at the map, right?
Yeah, I've wanted that from the
Potentially
beginning.
3, but
Yeah.
If we can, because.
I would agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and to Kalen's point, we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting, was that we still want to govern the way that we govern, right? So we're going to rotate board members through all the schools. At least this board is committed to doing that. I think the issue that you're bringing up about future boards and how the trustee areas, so I look at San Jose Unified, right? And in one, they have 55 schools. So in one trustee area, there could be 10 schools. That is a lot of work for one trustee. So they're not going to be going to a lot of stuff outside of
Their area.
Their area. They're going to get pretty busy with just the schools in their area. That's, unless we start opening high schools, I don't see that as much of an issue for us.
Well, we have a better shot at each one of us having two attendance areas in our bailiwick than most districts, given that we're fairly compact. We're rather circular on the map. So our odds of overlapping are, I think we have a better chance than many districts would have to do that. And I think it's a very good suggestion.
I agree. That's all I had on 6.
All right.
Anybody else wanted to?
So in terms of direction, I mean, I think there was general agreement around high school boundaries being important and other things being important. Do you need us to write that into this resolution before we pass it, or is us talking about it right now enough?
I think for the purposes of just transparency with the public, having that blank number 11 at the bottom, and it can be 11, 12, and so on, is helpful, so that this gets posted and anybody can go to your website and see this is where the board's priority was, because they may want to, they may watch the whole tape of tonight, but they may not. And so it's sort of a snapshot. So to the extent it's a sort of standalone consideration like that, let's try to have trustees that each cover at least 2 of the high school attendance areas. I think that's helpful to have as a separate criteria.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on 6, I'll make a motion to strike rural and to add neighborhood associations.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Let's wait and add that. Well, what would the language be for the high school?
Let's go through this.
Let's go through. Okay, cool.
And then we'll
cool.
do it at the end.
Thank you.
Harold, you keep.
Group
track of this,
editing
right?
is a lot of fun in front of the
We
board.
might have a lawyer that can help us with the wording.
yeah. Great. So number 7, Stacy, you pulled number 7.
Yeah, so I just wanted to have more of a discussion around whether or not, because we have a couple of, area, we have 17 and we have 85 and all other stuff. So I just wanted to see where people, because, mountains and topography and flatland and forests and all other stuff aren't as relevant, but there are some man-made geographical features that could pose, and I just wanted to see where everybody was at with that.
Like I said earlier, I don't think anybody thinks of themselves as north of 85 and south of 85, or I think it's pretty, everybody's connected, right? And so that's why I think it's good that you asked the question. It's like, are there any? Because I don't think of any. at all.
There aren't, in terms of east-west streets, 17 doesn't go for any distance without there being fairly major streets that let you get from the west side to the east side and vice versa. So no, it's never seemed to me like a barrier of that sort, not a political barrier. If Lexington Dam ever goes, it could be a physical barrier, but other than that. No,
The new
seriously.
ocean
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Campbell, yeah.
Fire department maps show the water going straight up the freeway and spreading out from there about 6 inches into everybody's homes. Just so you know, Mr. Insurance Man.
I've seen the map.
For demographer, as you go through a map and you have to find 1,000 people somewhere, is it helpful to be like, okay, well, we'll keep everyone on this side of the freeway and not just over and grab 5 blocks over here, or is it matter? Does it hurt you for us to take this piece out, considering we have 3 big freeways that go through our district? If you could speak into the mic, I'm sorry to do that, just for the people at home.
So the discussion you're having is very good to know that people don't identify with this side of the freeway, that side of the freeway. So, we don't want to create artificial borders. So knowing that, try to avoid the freeways. I would probably still leave in the criteria just because, the other major roads probably make more sense.
The way you said it, I was like, yeah, if you were going to grab an extra 1,000, maybe grab it near a major thoroughfare. Like, okay, part of this group off of Hamilton, which crosses 17, versus this part in the middle where you can't get across.
Yeah.
So, but I bet that would be something you would do anyway. But I think those are the closest ones that are important.
Yeah, exactly true. And we always try to follow the major roads mainly because we don't really want to cut through all the small streets. There's always an exception to everything. In Palm Springs, our neighborhood associations actually follow the tiny little streets. So we have crazy looking lines, but it's driven by that unique feature. So yeah, we don't want to be cutting through neighborhoods if we can avoid it. So that's why we tend to look at major roads, even if we're thinking more boulevards than freeways. But yes, your input is very useful, definitely, about the freeway.
So if I think of some major roadways through the district, I think of Prospect Road, I think of Meridian, I think of Bascom, Winchester,
Lawrence Expressway, St.
Lawrence
Thomas Expressway,
St. Thomas.
85, 280, 17. There's a ton. So I mean, we could take it out, but
Well, but
I think it gives them another
we
tool.
may find that one of those is a useful dividing line, so, yeah.
Okay,
That's what Robert's saying.
Yeah, I like that.
all right, so let's leave it in.
Number 8. So I kind of talked about this a little bit the last meeting. So I think personally, I'm not comfortable having this being a criteria. So I'm gonna try to take it out. But if we don't have the votes, I don't have the votes.
So can you just, I'm sorry. can
No,
you
no, go ahead.
elaborate
Yeah,
just a little bit more?
so number 8, the boundaries of the trustee area may consider avoiding pairing, it's tough to say, 2 or more incumbents in a single trustee area to the extent that's legally allowable. So here's my thinking. My thinking is we have 5 people on this board who live where they live, who move around too, right?
Well, at least 2 of us, right? Or maybe
At least
3
2 of us. I think
Not ever moving.
I rent. Other board members rent. So who knows? It depends on what that next lease looks like.
Right.
So I think if our goal is to build the strongest territories, I personally think where we live currently in 2019 is irrelevant because it's not really our seat, it's the public seat, and we happen to be in it right now. But 20 years from now, it's not relevant at all. So I just don't think it's a good criteria to set boundaries by.
So even 8 years from now, it might not be a good criteria to set by, is what you're saying. Okay.
And I'm glad you brought it up because it was the same thing I felt when they said that was one of the criteria. I had the opportunity, though, to, number one, hear that they said, well, the will of the people was that you're the 5 people. And so by changing it where you'd pit someone against each other, that may not be the will of the people. Additionally, in talking to two other cities, one of which is Campbell, they ended up taking this into account as one of their stronger maps as a result of they've created a community. They work within their community, and those people know them in that community, and striking it just because didn't make sense to them. And so I was like, okay, I get it, that part, right? And if it's possible to do it, if it's impossible, like we live a block apart and then 3 blocks over she lives, that's not going to work, right? You see, who are these 2 blocks? But I think we all live far enough apart, and with the other criteria, I think it's going to work out.
I'm
But
okay
it's-
with it being one of the criteria, but not at one of the top ones, put it
Yeah, I was
down the
going to
list.
say, I
Yeah.
think I agree a lot with what Kaylin said. I think I'm okay with having it as the absolute last priority. If everything else has been accounted for in these considerations and there's, no other way to make that last decision, then okay. But I would want everything else to be considered before.
So what would happen since we came on at the same time? If we ended up in the same trustee area, would we flip a coin to see who just steps down, or what would happen?
You're in a,
It would be at the next election.
Yeah, so you'd stay where you are till the next election because
No,
you're
no,
at large.
no, they would.
If they're in the
They'd
same
be
election cycle.
They are in the same election cycle, so
Yeah.
what you're saying is, let's say Kaylin, who's a renter, moves in next door to Linda, and now they're in the same trustee area, and they're running in the 2020 election. They are running as 2 incumbents for 1 seat,
Right.
and then anybody else who wants to join them. And then there could potentially be, because let's say that we made trustee area A where Kaylin currently lives, and because he moved into the area where Linda was living, there's no incumbent in the other seat. So there's no incumbent. It's a completely open seat.
Well, would we do an appointment? What would happen?
No.
Well, they'd run for office.
Somebody would run for office.
Be on the same
and-
cycle.
And they wouldn't run against
But I think,
an
like-
incumbent.
Well,
So-
but-
Trustee
Where I-
Gallagher?
Yes.
Can I just ask Mr. Friedman, you provided us a memorandum about some perhaps unintended consequences that can happen by not taking the incumbents where they are now into account. Can you just summarize that for us?
Sure.
again?
The struggle that we have is a practical struggle. So you're engaged in what's now a moral and philosophical policy struggle, but there's a practical consequence too, which is if you have 5 board members who each end up in their own trustee area, if feasible, because again, it's not always feasible, it usually is, it's really easy to determine which trustee areas will be up for election next. The 2 that were up in 2020 will be up in 2020. The 3 that were up in 2022 will be up in 2022. If you have multiple trustees in one area, you get into these very complex questions you're starting to discuss. So if you have somebody who's up in 2020 who's in the same trustee area as somebody who's up in 2022, the person in 2020 who would be running for office may not have a seat to run for, or alternatively, if they do run for it, then the person who is in the 2022 seat won't be able to run again in 2022. Which one of those people get bumped is completely unsettled in California. If you ask some people, they say one. If you ask the Department of Education, they will tell you they lean in one direction. We don't know until one of these things happens and it's litigated. So you run into that complication, and then you add to that, if you're left with empty trustee areas,
There you go.
you have to figure out which election cycle the empty trustee area is going to be in. On top of that, if you have one trustee in each area, you have representation for every area the moment you adopt the map, right? There's sort of a definition that there's an incumbent. You may choose not to rerun in 2020, which kills my theory on that, but if you choose to, there is representation for that area. When you start getting into, we had one recently with NDC where they had, I think, 3 trustees in one area and 2 vacant trustee areas, and it became a nightmare to try to figure out what the election sequence was going to be and what that was going to look like. So there is an ease of doing it, at least in the beginning, even if it's just a snapshot of where the trustees live now. It takes care of that complication. You do have, when you make your recommendation on your map, you also have to make a recommendation to the county committee on how to sequence the different trustee areas. And so you will also complicate things tremendously for the county committee when they receive this, because instead of seeing 5 trustees, 5 areas, they then have to start looking at what they think the sequencing might want to look like. So there are these sort of downstream effects to that decision.
I have one more question about that. So if 2 trustees ended up in the same trustee area, the second the map is adopted, would one of them have to step down? And if there's an empty trustee area, do you have to have a special election?
Right. So the easiest way of remembering this is you always get to carry out the term you were voted to. So if you have 2 trustees put in one area that were both till 2022, they both stay until 2022. If you ended up with vacant spaces, again, you have to then decide where they fit with the sequencing. You never have to go to 6 trustees because you can't kick out one of the people that already have a 4-year term. And so you may just end up with an area that stays vacant a little longer. Again, these vacant areas get really complicated about how do you have that election happen first to fill that area, but then if you put them in 2020, what if you put 2 other trustees that are already in 2020 in one trustee area? These permutations get really, really complicated, and Doug has a great time trying to sort them out when he's making the recommendations on the maps.
Or worse, if you put, if somebody who's up in 2022 moves into a vacant 20 seat, that one just blew my mind. I think
You could run again 2020. So I think for me, right, I'm trying to take myself out of this. Like, A, I don't know if I'm going to run. I have a lot of time to figure that out.
Not really.
But B, I mean, what?
I'll give you another
year and a
week.
half.
Kidding.
I don't think that should factor into our decision making during this process. I think we owe it to the community to do that without ourselves in mind, and then let things sort themselves out later. So I'll make a motion to strike number 8. Might die. No second. All right, so that is that. We will move on.
I do
Number-
appreciate you bringing it up so we could talk about it, though.
Yeah.
Because it was
Good
important.
discussion.
All right, did you have language for number 11?
I do. Before we get there, I just wanted to see if one of the considerations, I don't think this has to be in your criteria, but I'm just thinking of Mr. Johnson when he goes back to work on this. I heard from some of the board members that this is a criteria to maintain the incumbency issue, but it's not a high priority. In other words, look to other things first and then move to that. I'm just wondering, before we move off of number 8, perhaps the board would want to give a little more clarification if that's the board consensus.
You can make it a secondary consideration.
I don't know that there's any reason to change anything. It's already got lots of tries to and if
Yeah.
possibles, and I think it's okay.
I think it's pretty clear, and I think you can go, I think you've heard the direction of the board. Well, I should say you heard the direction of one board member, so, maybe we should just give a concur, or in terms of, if you absolutely can't make the maps work so that there's one trustee in each area, we're okay with that. Is that, did I summarize that right?
And won't there be more than one map?
Yeah,
There'll be many maps.
exactly. That's what I was going to add, is that there'll be at least 3 or 4 maps, and I'll show you what it takes. But, I always say, if one of the maps doesn't get a, "Are you crazy?" I probably haven't shown you a wide enough range of maps. So I'll show you a map that has you each in a separate seat, and you may all say, "This is nuts, no way." And that's completely fine. It doesn't hurt my feelings. But I want to show you the different trade-offs involved so that you can make the decision, and you may all in about 2 seconds say, "Nope." And that's perfectly fine. So, but yeah, you'll see different versions. That's right.
All right. Harold, you got that language?
I have that language.
All
So
right.
see how this works for everyone. I tried to keep it short. So I have it as, to the extent possible, each trustee area will encompass all or portions of at least 2 high school attendance areas. I'm looking at Doug to make sure that that
All?
makes sense from his standpoint.
Why would the word all?
Yeah,
That
what's
was
the word?
one.
What's with the word all?
So you want us to cut through it and we'd all have a section of each school?
Well, my only thought is that you may have a trustee area that encompasses all of one attendance area and drifts over into another one. Although I guess at that point, you probably aren't going to have the all, as I think about the way the map plays out. Because if you put it all in one, somebody else isn't going to be able to be in that trustee area.
Right.
I don't think you can get it so it's all in one, yeah.
So,
You
so
take it
perhaps
all out.
just leaving it at portions of and take out the all. So it would be to the extent possible, each trustee area will encompass portions of at least 2 high school attendance areas.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by me, second by Stacy. Any discussion on that? No? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. So we'll include that under number 11,
And for the record, that was 4-0.
4-0. We'll double check with Linda when she gets back. Is there anything else that you want to add? Linda, just to catch you up, can you read that statement again? We added this. We want to make sure you're okay with it.
So we added in number 11, which is to the extent possible, each trustee area will encompass portions of at least 2 high school attendance areas.
Perfect.
Great.
You want to vote for that?
Yes, I do.
5-0.
5-0.
All right.
I don't know.
Let's revote. Let's all in favor.
Aye.
All right. 5-0.
There was one, I'm going to say it only because I was thinking about it. My business happens to be not very far from my house, although my customers are all over the state of California. Is it possible to say, I'd really like those to be in the same area, or is that not a thing, since they're 1.7 miles apart?
I think the only thing that matters is the address that you are registered as a voter,
Yeah.
because that is what counts in terms of your eligibility.
I was talking about the neighborhood. It happens to be another neighborhood association that I'm active in, and so that's why I was like, oh, that'd be good if it was at least the office. But
Well, I think like knowing where you live and then knowing where the office is, I don't think he can even come up with a map that has all 5 of us in our own things without you having both those areas. So
okay,
I think one thing I was thinking about with this is we're kind of at that stage of, I've never done this before, but you go to buy a house I was looking for a place to live, right? And initially I had my items of, okay, I want it to have, washer dryer unit, I want to have a room, all these things. And then after going to see places, it became apparent that, I also would like parking to be easy. So we're at the stage, right, where we're doing our initial considerations. I think we'll have a lot more to react to that will make our considerations and our priorities a lot more clarified once we have something to react to.
I agree. And so my question around that is, we're passing this resolution. It's for transparency. It's to give direction to Doug to go develop these maps based upon this criteria. Everybody understands what's important to us. Now you come back and you show us, what was it, 35 maps, the cities? No. You come back and show us a variety of maps, and we sit there and go, you know what? We didn't think about this. We need to include Robert's business location in that trustee area. How do we properly document that for the process? Do we have to redo another resolution, or we just tweak the maps and it's part of the record of the meeting, or?
Yeah, typically what we've done is just have the board give direction that the next round of maps we'd like to see this. You always could go, at that point, just make a motion to amend the resolution. So you take the original resolution, you add item number 12 now.
But
I
the
think-
minutes of that meeting could form the official documentation.
Yeah, I think so. Or you could just, what we've done in some districts is we just put out that, there, literally put out a notice so it goes up on the website that an additional number 12 was added. So you can make it as formal or informal as you want to do it along the way. We always had contemplated when we came up with this form that you could amend the form as you go. Most of the school districts we work with, because things are moving quickly and they're working their way through it, they just give direction as opposed to amending.
So this is kind of on a tangent. So one of our motivations for being proactive in this is to avoid being sued under the CVRA. Is it possible if some of our documentation of our criteria and the inputs from the maps and things like that weren't as clear as here's a resolution, here's an amendment to the resolution, and all that other stuff, that we could still be sued after we've gone through this long process?
Well, I'm going to say in theory, somebody can always sue you, but in practice, if you have adopted a map and you have had the right number of public hearings and you did the pieces that you needed to do per statute, which is part of what you're doing tonight, you've complied with the California Voting Rights Act. That is for all of the challenges the CVRA gives us, this act gives us, the one wonderful thing about it is it basically says, if you check all the boxes, if you go down this process, they're really not supposed to interfere with each individual body's ability to decide exactly how they're going to get there, as long as you get to a map and that map is not clearly discriminatory, racially gerrymandered. There's certain criteria to take into consideration. So I don't think you have to worry too much about that degree of precision. And again, you can put out there on the website, this is the additional criteria that the board adopted. One of the recent ones, again, Doug and I worked on, they really significantly changed their direction after the initial direction was given. They never amended the resolution, but they let everybody know. They put the word out there that we were looking at a different approach now.
Okay.
All right, anything else you want to add or remove from this resolution before we move to approve?
I'd like to move to approve.
Second.
All right, so motion by Robert, second by Christina. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. All right, so we're going to move into item 5C, which is a public hearing, so I'll open the public hearing. This is to consider seeking a waiver from the State Board of Education and adoption of a resolution authorizing the superintendent to seek the waiver.
So moved.
All right, so we have a motion by Robert, second by Christina. Who's
Except
introducing?
I was going to say for the benefit of the public, we need to explain.
Yeah. Can someone explain what? Yeah, Harold. Thank you.
Do we pay more based on what seat he's in?
No. So what's before you tonight is a resolution addressing a waiver that virtually every school district that has gone through this process in California has sought. The purpose of this waiver is that the Education Code has an extra set of requirements that are applicable to school districts beyond what cities, special districts, fire districts have to do. And basically what it says in Education Code sections 5019 and 5020 is when you're done with all of this process, you then have to go to the county committee. Once you get to the county committee, you then have to go to the voters. And an election takes place where the electorate decides, do they want to move to trustee areas using the maps that you've approved? The problem with that is that if that succeeds, it's great. If it fails, it can actually be evidence of racially polarized voting. In other words, if you were trying to move to a way of having elections where minority populations have a stronger vote, they may get voted down when you have the election and you go to the electorate. It also takes time. It also takes money. So school districts routinely seek a waiver from the State Board of Education just to take away the requirement of that election, meaning that when you're done, it goes to the county committee. When the county committee is done, this process is completed. You don't have to then go to the electorate, wait an additional number of months. The other advantage of it is it allows people who are interested in running for office to know earlier what the trustee areas are. They don't have to wait months to find out what the electorate is going to do with it. And again, there's the cost savings. The good news is the state has granted every single one of these waivers. We were hoping the legislature this year would actually take a shot at just removing that requirement altogether, since it's unique to school districts, not to, for example, the city of Campbell going through this now, but apparently it didn't quite make it into the legislation, so we're hoping for next year. And so the motion tonight would approve getting the waiver sent to the state. We have the language as part of the resolution that would be waived, taken out of the legal requirements applicable to you, and it authorizes your superintendent to take the steps necessary.
So I just want to be clear. We're on a tight timeline to get the maps adopted, and that has to be adopted by us and then by the county committee by
Right.
August 14th, and our timeline allows us to do this. But the waiver can be outside that 90-day time period?
Yeah, unfortunately, the state takes so long, the state board, for you to get on their agenda. They're usually about 3 months behind where you are, and they only meet every other month, that it's not uncommon at all for a school district to seek the waiver and then go ahead and go through the process, complete the process, and then you hear back from the State Board of Education that your waiver's approved, you'd be on the calendar in all likelihood in September when you're done in August. If the state board shocked us all and for the first time ever denied one of these waiver requests, it wouldn't be too late to then go get on the ballot and go through the election process. So you're not giving anything up. For what it's worth, we've had dozens of school districts that have gone through this process and completed it before the waiver comes in from the state.
Okay, I'm just in my own mind, I want to make sure we got to get done in 90 days, and the waiver is kind of we're relying on a different timetable for that. And it's not
That's-
going to impact us.
That's right, with the tremendous caveat that nobody has yet litigated which of the steps have to be done within the 90 days. And so we have always taken the position that you have to be through the county committee, and at that point, you've done everything you can do. You shouldn't be sued, because at that point,
We've done everything within our span of control.
right, you've gone as far as you can possibly go in those 90 days.
Okay, thank you.
And we're on that tight time schedule for the public because that's the CVRA
That's right.
requirement, not ours. But we could get a waiver to 180 if somebody sued us.
Right.
We can only get that if we get sued,
But not anymore.
and if they agreed.
Right, you'd
Yeah.
have to have somebody threatening, they'd have to make a demand on you. They don't have to actually sue you, they make a demand. So once you have somebody making a demand on you, you have somebody that you can reach an agreement with. It's actually not a waiver. You reach an agreement under which you have an additional set of public hearings, and in exchange for that, you get up to the extra 90 days. For a school district that volunteers to move forward with this without being prompted by anybody, which is your case, you don't get the extra 90 days. There's a lot of irony built into the CVRA.
Great. So we do have a motion by Robert and a second by Christina.
Correct.
Any more discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes 5-0. So before we adjourn, just as next steps, on 7 days before the June 13th meeting, which is June 6th, the maps will become public and be posted. Our trustees will not see them before that date, so we will see them at the exact same time as the public. That's something the board opted to do.
We'll see them on June 6th?
June 6th, when they're posted to the public.
Okay, not here, because that's graduation day.
Correct. Yeah. Sorry. They'll be posted on the internet on June 6th. And then on the June 13th meeting, we'll be discussing and,
And when you say posted on our website or somebody else's?
yeah,
Okay.
our website.
Okay.
Bob is saying yes on our website with his, for the record.
Yes, on our website.
Thanks, Bob. All right.
Move
We
to adjourn.
Thank you. All right. So we have a motion by Christina, a second by Robert. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We are adjourned.